Greetings everyone, I'm Detective STARBORN, and I'm glad to see you on my YouTube channel. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new and interesting videos. Thank you and enjoy watching. A student disappeared 2 days before her birthday under strange circumstances. From the very first hours of the investigation, the police discovered a number of very suspicious leads that indicated that something terrible might have happened to her. Despite this, the investigation dragged on for many years, and only 12 years later did the shocking truth become known. However, the outcome of this investigation outraged the entire country, as no one expected such an outcome. Katelyn Markham was born on August 16, 1989, in the American city of Fairfield, Ohio. She had loving parents and a younger sister, as well as many friends. From childhood, she was known for being able to befriend anyone. Her acquaintances recalled how Katelyn could approach the shyest children, and within a minute they would be playing and having fun together. In addition, Katelyn was a very creative person. She was passionate about singing, drawing, and art. All of this determined her choice of future profession, and after school, the girl entered a local art institute to study graphic design. The summer of 2011 was supposed to be an important period in Katelyn's life. She was preparing for her final exams and was also going to move to Colorado with her fiancé John. The couple had been together for 6 years, and a year before that, they got engaged. After moving, they planned to get married and build their life together in a new city. On the morning of August 14th, Katelyn was supposed to go to her shift at the wedding dress store where she worked part-time outside of her studies. That day, her loved ones tried to contact her, but the girl did not answer their calls and messages. Soon her relatives began to worry and contacted Katelyn's superiors, but they were told that the girl had not come to work that morning. It all looked very strange. She was always in touch and had never missed work without warning before. Despite this, her relatives thought that Katelyn might have had some business and was too busy to answer them. As a result, they decided to wait, but when evening came and the girl still did not get in touch, their concern reached a limit. Her fiancé decided to stop by her house after work to check if everything was all right. In front of the small residential complex where Katelyn rented an apartment stood her car. Entering the apartment, which turned out to be unlocked, John found only her dog inside. Katelyn herself was not there. He also did not notice anything unusual in the apartment that could indicate that something bad had happened to Katelyn. Despite this, her absence throughout the day seriously worried all her loved ones, so John decided to call the police. He told them that his fiancée had not been in touch since morning, and they sent a patrol officer to the house. After inspecting Katelyn's apartment, he did not find any signs of breaking and entering, signs of struggle, or other indicators that a crime might have occurred there. However, something seemed very suspicious to him. The girl's keys were inside, as well as her wallet with documents. Considering that Katelyn herself was not at home, the policeman found all this quite suspicious. If she had really gone somewhere, the girl would have at least taken her keys and locked the door. John said that the last time they saw each other was the previous evening. They were sitting at Katelyn's house, and a mutual friend stopped by. After he left, John went to a party with other friends, and Katelyn decided to stay home since it was already late. After the party, John returned home, where he lived with his mother. They exchanged a few messages, and since then, Katelyn had not responded to him. The guy added that he wrote to her every morning and always received a response, but not this time. After that, the investigators talked to Katelyn's friends and relatives, but none of them had been in contact with the girl since the previous evening either. At the same time, they all claimed that Katelyn could not have just run away somewhere since it was completely unlike her. She had final exams ahead of her, which she was diligently preparing for. And just a few days later, it was supposed to be her birthday, which she planned to celebrate at a local restaurant surrounded by loved ones. Having gathered all this information, the police began to suspect that something bad might have happened to Katelyn and decided to organize a search operation. They attracted over 100 volunteers, divided them into groups, and began combing the city. Her relatives and friends also prepared flyers with information about Katelyn, and soon they were posted on almost every street. In parallel with this, the detectives tried to find at least some clues. Of course, the first thing they began to check was Katelyn's fiancé. On the very first day, the police noticed that there were small scratches on his neck, but John claimed that he had accidentally scratched himself while shaving. In addition, they suggested that he take a voice stress test, during which a person is asked questions and special software analyzes the voice recording, trying to identify deviations. The test showed mixed results, but the usefulness of this data was questionable. The detectives could not figure out for sure whether this meant John was lying or the fact that he was worried about his fiancée. From the very first hours, he took an active part in the search, answered all the questions of the police, and gave interviews to local TV channels, which by that time had already begun to cover the search operation. After that, the investigators checked his alibi and confirmed that John was indeed present at a party with friends that night. They were also able to confirm his further story that after the party, he went home and watched a movie on his laptop by examining data from his computer. After talking to a mutual friend of John and Katelyn, the detectives learned that he had indeed visited her home that evening. According to him, they discussed the couple's upcoming move, studies, and just chatted. At the same time, the friend added that Katelyn was behaving more quietly than usual and spent most of the evening preparing for her studies on her laptop. However, he then thought that the girl was simply worried about her upcoming exams, which were only days away. Thus, John's involvement seemed unlikely to them, and they continued to look for other clues. After obtaining a warrant to track Katelyn's phone, investigators found that it had been turned off at 12:06 a.m. and had no activity since then. They also saw that half an hour before that, she had sent John a photo of herself, which confirmed his story. No other traces of Katelyn could be found, so the police focused all their efforts on the search. In the following days, even more volunteers came to their aid, and the story of the girl's disappearance began to be covered by national media. Search groups combed forests, bodies of water, abandoned houses, but all this did not bring any results. This continued for several weeks, and during the entire search, the police were unable to find any traces of Katelyn. John continued to take an active part in her search, but with each new day, more and more residents of the city began to wonder if he was behind the disappearance of his fiancée. Over time, these rumors reached John himself, and he commented on the accusations against him, stating that at the moment, the only thing he wanted was to bring Katelyn home, and he had no time to be distracted by such accusations. Investigators also stated that they had no good reason to suspect John. His alibi was confirmed, he allowed them to search his house without a warrant, and in general, actively cooperated with the police on any issue, fulfilling all their requests. At the same time, John admitted that sometimes these accusations confused him. One day, he was posting flyers on one of the streets when a woman approached him and started a conversation about this case. During the conversation, she mentioned that most likely her boyfriend did it. At least everyone in town was talking about it. The search for Katelyn continued for several months, but eventually investigators were forced to stop it. During all this time, they had not managed to find literally a single clue, so the police decided to focus again on the investigation and processing incoming tips. By that time, Katelyn's case was being actively covered throughout the country, and detectives were receiving hundreds of calls. They carefully studied each such appeal, but even this did not bring them closer to finding the missing girl. They also regularly increased the reward for information on the case, and in the first few months, it reached $50,000. This continued for almost a year until a rather unexpected turn took place in the case. Police in Miami arrested a 28-year-old man who had assaulted a student. Initially, this fact went unnoticed until investigators in Katelyn's case found out that at the time of her disappearance, this man lived right across the street from her house. The detectives immediately went to Miami to interrogate him and find out where he was on the night of the girl's disappearance. However, during the investigation, they concluded that the man had no opportunity to commit this crime, and he was crossed off the list of suspects. Since then, the case has stalled for another year. On April 10, 2013, a man from a small town called Cedar Lake in neighboring Indiana went to search for scrap metal along a small road that ran near a wooded area. Passing by the trees, he noticed a bundle of black tarpaulin, inside which were bones. The man called the police, and officers sent the remains to the laboratory. It is noteworthy that during the search, they found another bag nearby, in which there was only a skull. Experts immediately determined that the remains belonged to a human, and using dental records, they quickly established the identity of the deceased. It was Katelyn. Thus, the police received confirmation that the girl had been dead all this time. They were also sure that they were dealing with a murder, since someone had separated her body and taken it to a neighboring state. At the same time, the killer did not even try to bury the remains, but simply threw them next to a pile of garbage. Due to the strong degree of decomposition, experts were unable to find any clues or even establish the exact cause of death. The only thing they were able to find was traces of a stab wound on one of the arm bones. In connection with all this, medical experts never named the exact cause of death, but still unconditionally confirmed the fact of murder. Due to the fact that the remains were found in another state, additional difficulties arose in this case. The police from Indiana and Ohio had to work together, but they still could not achieve any progress. They only concluded that most likely the victim's body was initially in another place, after which it was transported to that forest. Perhaps the criminal was afraid that it would be found and decided to take the remains further away. In 2015, Katelyn's father decided to hire a private detective, since it seemed to him that the police department of their city was not making enough efforts to solve this case. The detective conducted his own investigation, spoke with all of Katelyn's relatives and friends, and in the end identified two possible suspects. He passed this information on to the police, but they did not disclose the conclusions of this detective. In the same year, the reward for information on the case rose to $75,000, but all this still did not bring the investigators closer to solving the case. At the end of the year, the victim's father managed to get the case transferred from the police department of their city to the county police, and new investigators took over it. In 2016, they told reporters that they had a main suspect whom they considered guilty of the murder. However, there was no evidence for his arrest. For this reason, the police did not disclose the name of this person, and since then, the investigation has stalled again for years. In 2018, police from a neighboring town just a few miles from Katelyn's home found the body of another young girl. The circumstances of this crime strongly reminded them of Katelyn's case. Therefore, they immediately began to consider a possible connection. Soon they came to a suspect named Michael, and it turned out that he had been stalking the victim for several weeks before killing her. The police began to look for a possible connection to Katelyn's case, and at first it seemed that there simply wasn't one. However, the detectives eventually noticed something rather unexpected. In the killer's social network, there was a group photo from a music festival in which he was standing next to John, Katelyn's fiancé. The police went to him and asked if he knew this person. John replied that he met him at that festival, but they hardly communicated. No other connection between Michael and Katelyn could be found, and the police were unable to establish the man's involvement in her murder. This continued until 2023. In February, investigators unexpectedly announced that they had made the first arrest in Katelyn's case. The police took into custody a man named Jonathan. They told reporters that this person was a close friend of Katelyn and her fiancé. At first, the police did not disclose all the details of this arrest, but 2 months later, they made another unexpected move. Katelyn's fiancé, John, was arrested on suspicion of her murder. Only after that did the investigators share with the public what they had been able to find out over the past few years. When this case was transferred to the county police, new detectives studied all available materials from scratch. It immediately seemed to them that John was behaving rather suspiciously including the recording of his call to 911. In the opinion of the investigators, the man's words sounded like a pre-learned text. The same impression was from his initial testimony, which he gave to the patrol officer. Then, the detectives paid attention to the records of conversations with mutual friends of Katelyn and John. It turned out that many of them had shared several disturbing observations with the police back in 2011. Based on their stories, in the last months before her disappearance, Katelyn was saying that many problems had accumulated in their relationship, and she was even thinking about breaking up with John. According to the girl, he began to take illegal substances, behaved rather aggressively, and also constantly watched adult materials of a perverted nature. Another interesting point in the case materials was the testimony of witnesses, which had also been in the hands of the police since 2011. On the day of Katelyn's disappearance, 2 teenagers had snuck out to a party around 2 o'clock in the morning without their parents' knowledge. Passing by the house of John's mother, they saw 2 cars with their headlights off pull up to it. John got out of one car, went into the house, and quickly came out, after which he got behind the wheel, and both cars drove away. This testimony was at odds with his alibi, according to which he was sitting at home and watching a movie. Then the investigators discovered that initially the confirmation of his alibi was the open tabs on his laptop with websites about this movie. However, there was no real confirmation that John was really at home and watching it. Thus, the man actually had no alibi. On the contrary, 2 witnesses saw him that night under very suspicious circumstances. But that was not all. It turned out that on the night of the disappearance, John's phone was turned off 2 minutes before Katelyn's phone and remained inactive for 15 hours. John also deleted several messages that he sent to his fiancée that evening, and their content remained unknown. At the same time, he initially said that Katelyn did not respond to his message where he wrote "Good morning" to her. But as it turned out, he didn't send such a message at all. Another interesting fact was that the victim's neighbors heard arguing from her apartment that night and told the police about it. The neighbors specified that they heard blows, after which someone quietly repeated the word "no." At the same time, John himself stated that they did not quarrel, and the initial team of investigators, for some reason, did not find this strange. After studying all this information, the detectives came to the conclusion that John was the only serious suspect in this case, but they needed more evidence. They talked to Katelyn's friends again, and here a new discovery awaited them. One of her friends said that just a few months after the disappearance, John told her that he had romantic feelings for her. The girl was shocked by such a turn of events, since John continued to appear in front of the cameras and talk about how much he missed Katelyn and wanted to bring her back. The detectives also re-interviewed all the witnesses, after which they obtained a warrant to search the house of John's mother, where he lived at the time of the murder. There they found a black tarpaulin, exactly the same as the one in which the victim's remains were found. In addition, in his room, the police found several poems of a rather frightening content, written by John himself. For example, one of them contained a kind of internal dialogue. "Deep down, I love her. You have to kill her, but I love her. She must die." The detectives also learned that John was behaving very aggressively towards his new wife. By that time, he already had a family and children, and the police found a video in which he yelled at his wife while holding their little daughter in his arms. Lastly, the detectives found out that the place where Katelyn's remains were found was right on the way to the farm of John's father, where he regularly went. Thus, they established that the man knew this location well. Having gathered all this information together, they decided to talk to John, but he denied his involvement in the murder. When they listed all the suspicious moments and inconsistencies to him, he calmly replied that all this was circumstantial evidence. Unfortunately, for the investigators, he was right. They realized that with such a set of information, they were unlikely to get a conviction because there was not a single serious piece of evidence against John. However, they could still arrest him for giving false testimony based on the words of witnesses who saw him near the house at 2 o'clock in the morning. But there was another problem. According to them, John was not alone. Another car pulled up to the house with him. Following this lead, they concluded that his friend, Jonathan, could have been behind the wheel, and they began to study him more closely. Soon they found out that the man was also present in that photo from the music festival, where John was with the criminal convicted of killing another girl. After studying Jonathan's conversations with the police, in light of all the information they had, the detectives decided to arrest him for giving false testimony, although they did not specify the exact details. 2 months later, they arrested John himself, but this case was still hanging by a thread due to the lack of solid evidence. Apparently, the detectives were hoping that Jonathan would give a confession. At that time, they believed that someone had helped the fiancé get rid of the body, and it seemed that his friend was involved in this. Both men refused to admit their guilt, and John posted a bail of $1 million and was released pending trial. Based on all this, the investigators took a rather desperate step. They understood that at a jury trial, John would most likely be acquitted, so they decided to offer him a deal. The prosecution agreed to reduce the charge to third-degree murder in exchange for a confession, and John accepted this offer. In June 2024, he appeared before a judge and pleaded guilty. He refused to disclose any details of what happened. As a result, the judge sentenced him to the maximum possible term for such a charge, which in the state of Ohio was only 3 years. This sentence quite reasonably outraged the whole country, but the judge had no way to influence this. And if John had not accepted this offer, he could well have avoided even such a term, because there was simply no evidence for a first-degree murder charge. As for his friend Jonathan, all charges were dropped against the man for the same reasons. Apparently, the detectives never managed to find a single confirmation that he could have assisted in disposing of the body. After the sentencing, Katelyn's father stated that he was no longer concerned about the term itself, but the fact that he never learned the whole truth about his daughter's murder. The man also admitted that at first he did not believe in John's guilt, but over the years he began to lean towards this version. He recalled how John kept in touch with him and hugged him at Katelyn's funeral while he was the one who took her life. Soon after John was put in prison, his cellmate contacted the police and said that the man had told him the details of the murder. According to the inmate, that night an argument arose between them, and John flew into a rage. He attacked Katelyn and strangled her, after which he panicked and even thought about calling the police. He also considered the option of making it look like Katelyn did it herself, but later decided to get rid of the body. However, the detectives were in no hurry to believe this story. They allowed that John could indeed have told this story, since it was consistent with the available information, but whether he was telling the truth was a big question. The police believed that, in fact, the murder could have been planned in advance and not committed in a fit of rage. One of the investigators who interrogated John was sure that the man was a psychopath. According to him, he had talked to many criminals during his career, but John stood out strongly against their background. Despite all this, it will no longer be possible to influence the sentence, and John will be released in 2027 when he will be 39. The victim's parents no longer hope that someday they will be able to learn the whole truth. Even if John himself decides to tell everything, they are unlikely to believe his words. As a result, they can only watch as the man serves an insignificant term behind bars and is released, where his actions may well harm other people. The police also continue to study the possible connection between John, his friend, and the man who was convicted of murdering another girl. They do not exclude that this trio could have come together because of their perverted fantasies and inclination to murder, but there is no confirmation of this hypothesis. Share your opinion about this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching this video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I look forward to your comments on this situation. That was Detective STARBORN. See you soon.